The fire came on a Thursday night in May of 1873. Elijah Stone was 40 miles away in Denver when it happened. He was counting money from the sale of beaver pelts and dreaming about the new rocking chair he would build for Sarah come autumn. She had mentioned wanting one for the porch where she could sit and watch Lily chase fireflies in the summer twilight. He had already picked out the wood, already sketched the design in his mind, already imagined the smile on her face when she saw it. He never built that chair. The neighbors found what remained of his family before he returned. 2 bodies pulled from smoking ruins. 2 graves dug beneath the old cottonwood tree that Sarah had loved because mockingbirds nested in its branches every spring. 2 wooden crosses hammered into Colorado soil while Elijah Stone rode home with money in his saddlebags and hope in his heart. Sarah was 28 years old. She had hands that could gentle a wild horse or stitch a quilt that would last 3 generations. She could make biscuits so light they seemed to float off the plate, and she sang hymns while she worked in the garden. When Elijah had nightmares about the war, she would hold him until the shaking stopped and never once asked him to explain what he had seen. Lily was 5. She called mockingbirds singing angels and believed with absolute certainty that her father could lasso the moon if she asked him nicely enough. She had Sarah's dark hair and Elijah's gray eyes and a laugh that sounded like water running over smooth stones. She collected pretty rocks and pressed flowers and loved her father with the unconditional trust that only children possess. Gone. Both of them. Trapped in a ranch house that went up like kindling while Elijah was 40 miles away counting money that suddenly meant nothing at all. The sheriff called it a random attack. Bandits passing through. Bad luck and worse timing. But the story never sat right with Elijah. They had burned only his house, only his land. Nothing stolen except everything that mattered. The neighboring ranches stood untouched. The road showed tracks of horses that came with purpose and left with haste. This was no random violence. This was murder. But Elijah could prove nothing, could find no evidence beyond his own burning certainty, could do nothing but kneel beside 2 small graves and feel his heart turn to ash inside his chest. Sarah's last words came to him through a neighbor woman named Martha who had tried to pull her from the flames. Martha had burns on her own hands from the attempt, burns she would carry for the rest of her life. She sat with Elijah the day after the funeral and told him what Sarah had said with her final breath. Tell him never to let anyone die alone. Simple words, impossible words, a promise that weighed heavier than any Bible oath Elijah had ever sworn. Sarah knew she was dying, knew there was no escape from the flames that consumed their home, and in that final moment she had thought not of herself, but of her husband, of the darkness that might swallow him, of the man he might become without her light to guide him. She asked him to keep helping others, to keep his heart open even when grief made him want to close it forever, to honor her memory not with vengeance, but with compassion. Elijah made that promise beside her grave, made it with tears running down his face and his hands pressed against soil that still smelled of smoke, made it knowing that keeping it might be the hardest thing he ever did. Then he sold the ranch, what remained of it anyway, the land that someone had killed his family to possess. He sold it for less than it was worth because he could not bear to stay another night in the shadow of that burned foundation, could not bear to wake each morning and see the cottonwood tree with its 2 small graves beneath spreading branches. He took the money and disappeared into the Rocky Mountains. For 3 years, Elijah Stone lived as the mountain men of old had lived. He built a cabin at 9,000 feet where winter lasted 7 months and solitude was absolute. He trapped beaver and fox and sold their pelts in distant towns where no one knew his name. He learned to read the weather in the clouds and find water in the driest valleys and move through the wilderness without leaving tracks. The mountains did not ask questions, did not remind him of what he had lost, did not expect him to smile or make conversation or pretend that the hollow place in his chest was anything other than a wound that would never fully heal. But even in his isolation, Elijah kept Sarah's promise. In 3 years, he saved 7 people lost in the high country, rescued 3 more from bear attacks, led a stranded wagon train to safety through a blizzard that should have killed them all. He did not seek out these opportunities, did not go looking for people to save, but when he encountered them, he helped, without hesitation, without expectation of reward, without ever explaining why. Tell him never to let anyone die alone. Sarah's voice lived in his memory like a compass pointing true north. Every life he saved was a prayer offered to her spirit. Every act of mercy was a promise renewed. Now, it was August of 1876, 3 years and 3 months since Elijah had knelt beside those graves and made his vow. The sun hung low over the San Juan Mountains, turning the Colorado sky the color of heated iron. Elijah guided his gray horse Ash along a trail toward the town of Silver Creek. 3 days of hard riding from his cabin, 3 days to sell pelts and buy ammunition and salt for the coming winter. His saddlebags carried honest money earned from honest work. His mind carried the exhaustion of a man who had forgotten how to rest. His heart carried the weight of promises that grew no lighter with the passing years. The gunshots changed everything. 3 cracks echoed through the canyon walls, sharp, deliberate. Not the sound of hunters bringing down game. This was the sound of people hunting people, of violence with intent behind it. Elijah's hand moved to the Winchester rifle in its scabbard before his conscious mind registered the decision. Ash sensed the tension and quickened pace without being asked. 4 years of cavalry service had taught the horse to respond to his rider's instincts. 4 years of war had taught the rider that hesitation killed. Dust rose ahead, visible against the darkening sky. Movement. Running. Someone fleeing and someone pursuing. The smart choice would be to swing wide. Avoid whatever trouble was unfolding in the rocks ahead. Elijah had learned in the cavalry that other people's gunfights had a way of creating fresh graves. The wise man minded his own business. The survivor stayed out of conflicts that did not concern him, but Sarah's voice lived in his memory. Never let anyone die alone. He spurred Ash forward around the outcropping of red stone. The scene revealed itself like a painting of cruelty hung in some devil's gallery. A young woman ran across broken ground toward the shelter of a boulder cluster. She moved low and fast despite the blood that stained her right shoulder dark and spreading. Her dress had once been white, a wedding dress perhaps, simple cotton meant for a frontier ceremony. Now it was torn and filthy and splashed with crimson. 20 feet behind her lay a young man face down in the dust. He might have been 19. He did not move, and the hole in his chest explained why. No doctor could fix what a rifle bullet had done to him. 4 men on horseback closed in for the kill, rifles raised, faces hidden by bandanas. They had the easy confidence of predators who had already tasted blood and wanted more. They had not heard Elijah approach. The wind was wrong for them, and they were focused on their prey with the single-minded attention of wolves running down wounded deer. Elijah counted the distance, 60 yards. A long shot with a Winchester, but he had made longer. In the war, in the Apache campaigns, when he was still a soldier who followed orders and believed that duty meant something beyond killing for the powerful. He did not shout a warning. Warning would give them time to scatter, time to take cover, time to put a bullet in the woman before he could stop them. The cavalry had taught Elijah many things, and one of them was this. When violence becomes necessary, hesitation is a luxury the righteous cannot afford. He pulled the Winchester from its scabbard, brought it to his shoulder in one smooth motion, born of 10,000 repetitions, found his target, controlled his breathing, squeezed the trigger. The first man dropped from his saddle before the sound reached the woman's ears, dead before he hit the ground. A clean shot through the center of mass that any sergeant would have praised. The second man had just enough time to turn his head toward the unexpected thunder before Elijah's second shot punched through his shoulder and spun him sideways off his horse. He landed badly. His head struck stone with a crack audible even at 60 yards. He did not move again. The remaining 2 gunmen wheeled their mounts, survival instinct overriding their bloodlust. They spurred hard for the rocks, leaving their companions and their target behind. Running because they recognized what they faced. a shooter who did not miss, a man who had learned his craft in the hard school of war. 3 shots, 2 men down, 1 woman still breathing. Elijah rode forward slowly, rifle still ready, eyes scanning for tricks. Bandits in these territories used every deception a desperate mind could invent. A woman bleeding on the ground made excellent bait for a bushwhacking. But this was no trick. The young man was beyond help, his eyes already clouding with the particular emptiness that only death brings. Elijah had seen that emptiness too many times to mistake it for anything else. In field hospitals after battles, in Apache camps after raids, in the faces of friends who had caught bullets that should have found him instead. The woman had collapsed against a boulder, her left hand pressed against her wounded shoulder. Her right hand gripped a small knife with the desperate strength of someone who knew she had no other options left. Her hair was dark and tangled. Her face was pale beneath trail dust and the flush of pain. Her eyes were the color of winter sky, gray and blue and full of suffering and something harder than suffering. Fear, suspicion, the expectation of cruelty. Elijah dismounted 10 feet away, kept his movements slow and visible, non-threatening, the way he might approach a wounded animal that could still bite. "Miss," he called out, his voice carrying the low calm he had used to gentle, frightened horses and even more frightened soldiers. "Those men are gone now. You are safe. I am going to help you." She looked at him with those winter sky eyes, searched his face for the lie she expected to find there. Strange men did not help women alone in the wilderness. Strange men took what they wanted and left bodies behind. That was the lesson life had taught her, the truth written in the blood of the boy who lay 20 feet away. Why? The question cut through the air like another gunshot. Her voice carried only the faintest accent, the musical cadence of New England softened by years in rougher country, clear enough despite her pain. "Why would you save me? You do not know me." It was not the gratitude Elijah had expected, but it was honest, and he had learned to respect honesty more than manners, learned that truth mattered more than comfort even when truth was hard to hear. "I see a person who needs help." He knelt slowly, kept his hands visible, open and empty except for the bandages he pulled from his saddlebag. "I do not see an enemy. I see someone hurt and alone, and I promised a long time ago that I would not let anyone die alone if I could prevent it." Her eyes searched his face again, looking for the crack in his armor, the hidden cruelty beneath the helpful words. She had been betrayed before. He could see it in the way she held herself, the way she watched him like a hawk watches a snake, ready to strike at the first sign of danger. But something in his weathered features, in the steadiness of his gaze, in the grief that lived behind his eyes like a permanent resident, something made her hand loosen slightly on the knife. "Who are you, Elijah Stone?" "Most folks call me Elijah, though I had a sergeant once who called me Iron Hand." "Why Iron Hand?" "Because my shooting hand does not shake." He gestured toward the 2 bodies in the dust. "Not when it matters." She looked at the fallen men, at the precision of the shots that had dropped them, at the rifle still in easy reach of his right hand. Then she looked back at him with something that might have been respect or might have been reassessment. "You were cavalry, 4 years. Mustered out in '73 after my wife died. Been living in the mountains since then. Trapping, hunting, keeping to myself mostly." He finished pulling supplies from his saddlebag. "Now let me look at that shoulder before you bleed out and make my rescue pointless." "The young man," she said, her voice cracking on the words. "Daniel, my brother. He was 19. Elijah moved to Daniel first, checked for signs of life he knew he would not find. The bullet had gone through the heart. Death had come fast, which was the only mercy available in such circumstances. He closed the boy's eyes with a gentleness that seemed strange on a battlefield, a tenderness learned from Sarah, who had taught him that every soul deserved dignity in death regardless of circumstance. "I will bury him proper," Elijah said, "according to your customs if you tell me what they are. He was protecting you. That kind of courage deserves to be honored." Something cracked behind her eyes, the wall she had built to keep herself functioning in the face of horror. Tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting tracks through the dust and blood. "You would do that, bury a stranger. Every person deserves honor in death. That is not Eastern wisdom or Western wisdom. That is just being human." He returned to her and began working on the shoulder wound. The bullet had passed through cleanly, deep but without shattering bone, through and through, that would heal if infection did not set in, if she received proper care, if luck remained on her side for a change. She bore his ministrations without complaint, her jaw tight, her breathing controlled, the knife finally set aside within reach but no longer gripped like a lifeline. "My name is Clara," she said quietly. "Clara Weston." "Clara," Elijah repeated, getting the name settled in his mind. "A good name, strong. I was traveling to Silver Creek." She continued, "To meet a man I have never seen, a husband arranged through letters." Her laugh was bitter and brief. "My father died last year, left nothing but debts. My mother passed when I was young. No family except my grandmother who lives in Silver Creek. No money, no options. Mail-order bride. That is the polite term." Clara looked at the blood on her dress, the wedding dress she had been wearing when the bandits attacked. "Daniel was escorting me, protecting me. And now he is dead because of me, not because of you." Elijah tied off the bandage with practiced efficiency, because of the men who shot him, the men who chose violence. Never blame yourself for the cruelty of others. She studied him with those winter eyes. "You speak like a man who has learned hard lessons. I have buried a wife and a daughter, Sarah and Lily, gone 3 years now." He touched the leather cord around his neck where a wedding ring hung hidden beneath his shirt. "House fire while I was away. Never got to say goodbye. Never got to tell them one more time how much they meant to me." Clara was silent for a long moment. Then she reached into a small leather pouch at her belt. Despite the blood and dust, despite the trembling of her fingers, she withdrew a pearl-handled comb, small and delicate and obviously treasured. "My mother's." She held it up to the fading light. "She died when I was 21. Fever took her in the spring. She gave me this the night before she passed, said it would bring me luck." Elijah looked at the comb, then at Clara's face, saw the grief there that mirrored his own. Two strangers bound by loss meeting on a bloody trail in the Colorado wilderness. "I am sorry," he said, knowing the words were inadequate, knowing nothing was adequate in the face of such loss. "You understand," Clara said softly. "That is why I will trust you. A little. For now." They buried Daniel as the sun disappeared behind the western peaks. Elijah dug the grave himself while Clara sat against a rock and directed him through the dizziness of blood loss. Deep enough to keep scavengers out. Marked with stones arranged in a cross pattern. Words spoken over the mound that came from no particular faith but carried weight nonetheless. He was brave, Elijah said when the work was done. 19 years old, and he died protecting someone he loved. There are worse ways to be remembered. Clara could not stand for the simple ceremony, could barely keep her eyes open, but she whispered words of her own, prayers perhaps, or promises to a brother who would never hear them. When it was finished, Elijah lifted her onto Ash's back and climbed up behind her. She weighed almost nothing. The injury and days without proper food had stolen her strength. She leaned back against his chest without resistance, too exhausted to maintain suspicion, too hurt to care about propriety. "There is a cave about 5 miles west," Elijah told her. "Shepherd's Shelter, the locals call it. We will rest there tonight, tend that wound proper, figure out what comes next in the morning." "What comes next?" Clara's voice carried an edge of bitter humor. "Bandits tried to kill me. You saved me. Tomorrow different bandits will try again, or the same ones if they find their courage. Not if I can help it." The words came out harder than Elijah intended, carrying the weight of a promise he had not quite meant to make, but would not take back. "I said you are safe now. I meant it." They rode in silence as night fell over the San Juan Mountains. A mountain man and a wounded bride bound together by violence and accidental mercy. Behind them 2 bodies lay in the dust. 1 buried with honor. 2 left for the crows. Ahead, 5 miles of rocky trail led to shelter and whatever trust could be built between two people who had every reason to fear the world and one fragile reason to try trusting each other instead. The shepherd's shelter was exactly as Elijah remembered it, a shallow hollow carved into a red rock face, fronted by a crude stone wall that some long-gone herder had built to keep the wind out. Inside there was space enough for 2 people and a small fire. Nothing more. The air smelled of old smoke and animal musk. But it was shelter. And shelter mattered when the mountain night turned cold enough to kill. Elijah built a fire with practiced efficiency, using dead wood from a nearby juniper thicket, coaxing flame from flint and steel with the patience of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. The light pushed back the darkness and brought warmth that made Clara's shoulders relax for the first time since he had found her. He set water to boil in a dented pot, then turned his attention to the rabbit he had shot during the ride. A quick kill made while Clara dozed against his back, fresh meat to restore her strength, hot food to warm her from the inside. "You cook like a grandmother," Clara said, watching him skin the rabbit with more care than speed. "Your hands are too gentle." Elijah looked up, caught off guard by the observation, then saw the faint hint of humor in her eyes. Not quite a smile, but close enough to matter. "My wife used to say the same thing, said I cooked like I was scared the food would bite back." He added the meat to the pot with wild onions he had gathered. "But nobody ever died from my cooking. Not yet, anyway." "Yet," Clara repeated, and this time the smile almost reached her lips. "I have not tasted it." It was a small moment, a fragment of normal conversation between 2 people sharing a fire, but it felt enormous after the violence of the afternoon. Elijah found himself grinning despite the exhaustion that weighed on his bones. "Fair point. I will let you be the judge." While the stew cooked, Elijah checked Clara's wound again, cleaning it with boiled water and applying a poultice made from herbs he carried for exactly this purpose: yarrow for bleeding, plantain for healing, knowledge passed down from old trappers who had learned it from native healers who had known these mountains for generations. The bleeding had stopped. The flesh around the bullet hole showed no signs of infection yet, though the next few days would tell the real story. Wounds that looked clean could turn deadly without warning. Fever could set in. Rot could spread. A woman could survive a gunshot only to die from what came after. Clara bore his ministrations without complaint, her jaw tight, her breathing controlled. But when he finished, she spoke quietly. "You mentioned a wife. Where is she?" Elijah's hands stilled for just a moment, then continued their work putting away supplies. "Dead. 3 years now. Her and our daughter both." The words came easier than they once had, though the grief beneath them never really faded. "House fire. I was away selling pelts, came home to find them already buried." Clara was silent for a long moment. "I am sorry. The neighbors did what they could. A woman named Martha tried to pull Sarah from the flames, burned her own hands doing it, but the fire was too fast, too hot." Elijah stared into the campfire, seeing other flames in memory. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was already too late. "What caused it?" "That is what I have wondered for 3 years. Elijah's voice went flat. "Cold. The sheriff said bandits, random attack. But they only burned my place, only my land, nothing stolen, nothing taken except the 2 people I loved most in the world. You think someone wanted them dead? I think someone wanted me to suffer, or wanted me gone, or wanted my land without having to pay fair price for it." Elijah shook his head. "But I could never prove anything, never found evidence, never found the men responsible. So I sold the ranch and disappeared into the mountains. To hide, to heal, or try to." He looked at her directly. "The mountains do not ask questions, do not remind you of what you have lost, do not expect you to smile and pretend everything is fine when your heart is broken into 1,000 pieces." Clara nodded slowly, understanding in her pale gray eyes. "My mother passed away some years ago, my father last year, my brother this morning. She touched the pearl comb still secured in her pouch. "I know something about loss." "Then you know it never really goes away," Elijah said. "You just learn to carry it. Learn to keep walking even when the weight feels impossible. Learn to find reasons to live even when dying seems easier." They ate the stew in comfortable silence. Elijah was relieved when Clara took a second serving without complaint. The food was simple but hot, and heat mattered when the body was trying to heal. After they ate, Clara's eyes grew heavy, exhaustion finally overwhelming her will to stay vigilant. "Sleep," Elijah told her, laying out his bedroll for her use. "I will keep watch. You need rest too. I have gone longer without sleep. Cavalry training. I will wake you in a few hours and we will switch." He settled himself near the cave entrance, Winchester across his lap, watching the fire's glow dance on the stone walls. But Clara did not sleep immediately. She studied him from the bedroll, her gray-blue eyes thoughtful in the firelight. "The ring around your neck, under your shirt, your wife's." Elijah touched the wedding band hanging from a leather cord. He had worn it there since the funeral, unable to put it on his finger, but unwilling to let it go. "Sarah, that was her name. Emily Dawson before we married. She died on May 15, 1873. A Thursday." The specificity mattered somehow, keeping the memory precise. "Before she died, she told Martha to give me a message. Said to tell me never to let anyone die alone." Understanding dawned in Clara's expression. "So you could not leave me?" "No, I could not." Elijah met her gaze steadily. Some promises matter more than safety. Sarah knew that. She ran back into a burning house trying to save our daughter. Did not succeed, but she tried. That kind of courage, that kind of love, it demands something from the people left behind. Clara nodded slowly. "You understand loss. That is why you do not let me lose more." Something like that. Elijah fed another stick to the fire. "Now sleep. Tomorrow brings its own troubles." This time Clara obeyed, her breathing evening out into the rhythm of exhausted sleep within minutes. Elijah kept his vigil, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness, the distant cry of a coyote, the whisper of wind through stone, the soft crackle of burning juniper. He thought about the woman sleeping 6 feet away, about the choice he had made to save her, about where that choice might lead. He had no way of knowing that in Silver Creek, 40 miles to the northwest, a man named Silas Blackwood was counting money and planning murder. No way of knowing that this single act of mercy on a dusty trail would set in motion events that would test every promise Elijah Stone had ever made. All he knew was that he had saved a life today, and for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. Morning came with the particular clarity that only the mountains could provide. The air was cold enough to sting the lungs. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at directly. The sun rose like a hammer strike over the eastern peaks. Elijah had dozed lightly through the night, waking fully at the first hint of dawn. Clara still slept, her breathing steady, her face peaceful in a way that made her look younger than the 26 years he guessed she carried. He let her rest while he saddled Ash and checked their supplies. Water was their main concern. He had enough for maybe 2 days if they were careful, and the trail to Silver Creek would take at least that long with Clara injured, but there was no help for it. They could not stay here, and going back was not an option. He was examining Clara's wound when she woke, her eyes snapping open with the instant alertness of someone accustomed to danger. For a moment she seemed disoriented. Then memory returned and some of the tension left her shoulders. "How do you feel?" Elijah asked. "Like I was shot." But she sat up without assistance, testing her range of motion. "The pain is less. Your medicine worked." "Not my medicine. My wife's. She taught me which plants help and which ones kill." Elijah sat back on his heels. "We need to talk about what comes next. Those men who attacked you. They will report back to whoever hired them. You will be hunted." Clara's expression hardened. She reached into her bodice and withdrew a folded piece of deerskin. When she unfolded it, Elijah saw markings in faded ink, symbols he did not recognize, a map of some kind. "I need to tell you the truth." About the real reason I am going to Silver Creek. I am listening. The husband I was supposed to meet. That was just the excuse. The reason my brother and I could travel without raising suspicion. She touched the map fragment. My grandmother lives in Silver Creek. Ruth Whitfield. She has the other half of this map. What does it lead to? Clara's eyes met his, searching for trustworthiness, finding something there that made her continue. Whitfield Valley, a place my family has known for generations, hidden in the mountains, sacred to us. She traced the markings with her finger. Our ancestors are buried there, 500 years of history painted on cave walls, stories told in ochre and charcoal on stone. Why split the map? Protection. If one person is caught, the enemy still cannot find the valley. Clara's fingers traced the symbols. There is silver under the valley. A mining baron named Silas Blackwood wants it. He will destroy the burial grounds, destroy the cave paintings that tell 500 years of our family history. We must reach the valley before the full moon on August 20th. We must perform a ceremony of protection. Elijah absorbed this information, his mind already working through the tactical problems. You cannot walk into Silver Creek as a woman alone with a gunshot wound. They will ask questions you cannot answer. I know. Clara met his eyes. I will need help. I will need someone who knows the territory, someone who can guide me to my grandmother, and then to the valley. She paused. Will you help me? Or does your promise end here? Elijah thought about the sensible answer, the safe answer. He thought about his cabin waiting in the high country, about the quiet life he had tried to build from the ashes of his old one. He thought about all the reasons to say no, to wish this woman well and ride away from her troubles. Then he thought about Sarah's last words, about promises that mattered more than safety. I said I would get you home, Elijah replied. If Whitfield Valley is your home, then yes, I will help. The relief that crossed Clara's face was quickly hidden, but Elijah saw it. Trust was a fragile thing, especially trust between a wounded woman and a mountain man she had known for less than a day. But it was a start. They left the cave an hour later. Clara wore Elijah's spare shirt over her ruined dress. It hung loose on her smaller frame, but provided warmth and modesty. Her wounded shoulder was bound tight with clean bandages. Her face was pale but determined. The ride to Silver Creek would take them through some of the most unforgiving country in the territory. But Elijah knew the trails. He knew where to find water, where to avoid ambush points, where to push hard, and where to rest. What he did not know was waiting for them in Silver Creek. The transformation happened at Spring Creek, 5 miles outside of town, where cottonwood trees offered shade and clear water ran over smooth stones. Elijah had carried the dress in his saddlebag for 3 years, unable to throw it away, but unable to look at it without pain. Brown calico, simple and sturdy, the kind Sarah had worn when working in the garden. Now he pulled it out and handed it to Clara without ceremony. This was my wife's, he said quietly. She would want it to save a life. Clara took the dress carefully, as if it were made of spider silk instead of cotton. I do not know how to wear this. The buttons are in the back. I will help with those once you are in it. The shawl goes over your shoulders. The hat hides your hair. Elijah turned his back to give her privacy. Behind him, he heard the rustle of fabric, a muffled curse when she struggled with the unfamiliar garment. 5 minutes passed before she spoke again. I cannot reach the buttons. Elijah turned slowly. Clara stood with her back to him, the dress hanging loose, her dark hair falling past her shoulders. His hands were steady as he worked the buttons, though something in his chest tightened at the intimacy of the moment. Sarah had been the last person he had helped dress. The memory was sharp enough to cut. There, he said when the last button was secured. Now the shawl and you are done. Clara walked to the creek's edge and looked at her reflection in the still water. The woman looking back could have been Mexican or Spanish, certainly not remarkable at first glance, but her eyes held a sadness that Elijah recognized. I look like someone else, like I have betrayed who I am. No. Elijah came to stand beside her. You look like someone brave enough to survive. The clothes change. The spirit inside does not. Your ancestors would understand. She studied him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression. You speak with wisdom. Your wife taught you well. She tried. I was a slow learner. Elijah managed a small smile. Ready to face Silver Creek, as ready as I will ever be. They rode into town at 3 in the afternoon, when the August heat made most sensible people seek shade and cold beer. Silver Creek sprawled across the mountain valley like a promise half kept. Wooden buildings thrown up too fast to be pretty but solid enough to house the miners and gamblers and merchants who had flooded in since the silver strike of '74. Main Street throbbed with the particular energy of a boom town. Too much money chasing too much trouble. Elijah kept Clara close as they navigated the crowded street. Men looked because men always looked at a woman, but none looked twice. She was just another figure in a town full of strangers, notable only because she rode behind a hard-eyed mountain man who clearly knew how to use the Winchester tied to his saddle. They almost made it through without incident. Almost. Outside the Silver Nugget Saloon, 5 miners already drunk despite the early hour called out as they passed. "Hey, pretty lady, where are you from?" One of them bigger than the others, and meaner added with a leer. "She looks like one of them Apache squaws. Too pretty for a savage, though." Elijah stopped Ash with a word. His hand did not move to his rifle. Did not need to. His eyes did all the threatening necessary. "The lady is my cousin visiting from the south. You got a problem with that?" The big miner saw something in Elijah's face that made him reconsider his bravado. Maybe the scar on Elijah's left forearm visible below his rolled sleeve. Maybe the way he sat in the saddle like he was born there. Maybe just the cold certainty in his voice. "No problem, mister. No problem at all." Before Elijah could respond, Clara spoke in flawless Spanish, her accent perfect. "Gracias, primo. Estos hombres son muy ruidosos." The miners lost interest immediately. Just another woman with an overprotective relative. They turned back to their bottle and Elijah rode on. "You speak Spanish?" he asked quietly. "I learned young that words are weapons too." Clara's voice carried a hint of steel beneath its softness. "Languages open doors. And sometimes they let you close doors behind you. You are smarter than I gave you credit for. Most men make that mistake." Dr. William Hayes lived at the respectable end of Fremont Street. White-painted wood with a green door and a sign advertising his services as physician and surgeon. Elijah had known William for 2 years. Ever since the doctor had set a compound fracture in Will Carson's leg and refused payment because Will was broke. Good men were rare enough in the territory that Elijah made a point of remembering them. He knocked 3 times, evenly spaced. The door opened to reveal William Hayes, 43 years old, gold-rimmed spectacles, the permanent stoop of a man who spent too much time bent over patients. His expression went from polite to surprised to concerned in the space of a heartbeat. "Elijah." "Lord, what brings you to town?" "Need your help, William. This is Clara. She is hurt, and she needs to see someone named Ruth Whitfield." William's eyes flicked to Clara, and Elijah saw the moment of recognition. The doctor was too observant to miss certain things, too kind to comment on them where others might hear. "Come in. Quickly. Margaret, we have guests." Inside the house smelled of carbolic acid and coffee. Margaret Hayes appeared from the kitchen, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. She was 41 with brown hair pulled into a sensible bun and the kind of face that smiled easily. Until she saw Clara. Then she stopped dead, her hand flying to her mouth. Clara Weston from Boston." Clara's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Mrs. Margaret, you remember me? Remember you, child. I taught you to read and write for 2 summers when you stayed in Silver Creek as a child." "Of course I remember." Margaret crossed the room and pulled Clara into a careful embrace, mindful of the wounded shoulder. "Oh, sweetheart, what happened? Daniel is dead." "My brother, he was 19. We were attacked on the road. Men with guns." Margaret held her tighter. "I am so sorry. So very sorry." The reunion was interrupted by heavy knocking at the front door, the kind that demanded attention. William looked through the window and his face went pale. 3 armed men. One of them is Marcus Crane. Elijah knew the name. Marcus Crane had been 7th Cavalry, same as Elijah, until he was dishonorably discharged in '74 for war crimes, killing women and children during a raid. The kind of man who gave soldiers a bad name and slept soundly doing it. Margaret moved fast. She pushed Clara toward a door hidden behind a bookshelf. Basement. Now. William, get her downstairs. She turned to Elijah. You sit in the parlor. Read the newspaper. Look bored. Elijah obeyed. Settling into a chair with a copy of the Silver Creek Gazette spread in front of him, his heart hammered against his ribs, but his hands were steady. Iron Hand. The nickname had never been more literal. William opened the door. Gentlemen, how can I help you? Crane pushed past without invitation, his 2 companions following. He was 35, built like a bull, a scar running from his hairline to his jaw, eyes like dirty ice. Those eyes swept the room and stopped on Elijah. Stone. Crane's voice scraped like a rusty blade. Been a while since the cavalry days. Crane. Elijah did not stand, did not put down the newspaper. Heard you got yourself dishonorably discharged. War crimes, was it not killing children? Red mottled Crane's cheeks. Always thought you were better than the rest of us. That is why they busted you down to private when you refused orders. I refused to shoot women. Call that what you want. Elijah finally looked up, meeting Crane's glare without flinching. What brings you to Dr. Hayes's house hunting? A young woman, mid-20s, wounded in the shoulder. You seen her? A wounded woman in Silver Creek. Elijah let disbelief color his voice. They would hang her before she made it to Main Street. I have seen miners and Mexicans, no wounded women. Crane's eyes narrowed. He turned slowly, examining the parlor. Elijah could see him cataloging details, searching for proof. His gaze snagged on something, and Elijah's stomach tightened. On the kitchen table, barely visible through the doorway, sat a small leather pouch, decorated with traditional beadwork, the kind of thing that would be impossible to explain away. But Margaret was already moving, picking up the pouch with easy familiarity. Oh, you mean this? A patient gave it to me. Mexican woman, very sweet. She makes these to sell. Beautiful work, is it not? Crane stared at the pouch, then at Margaret, then back at the pouch. Elijah could see him weighing the story, looking for holes. Finally he grunted. Blackwood is offering $1,000 for the woman, $2,000 for anyone hiding her. You sure you have not seen anyone? Elijah stood now, rising to his full height. He had 2 inches on Crane and he used them, moving into the other man's space with deliberate intent. I said no. You calling me a liar? For 10 seconds, neither man moved. Crane's hand drifted toward his gun. Elijah did not react, just stood there with the kind of calm that came from knowing he could draw and fire before Crane cleared leather. Iron Hand. The nickname was a promise. Crane broke first. Fine, but I am leaving a man outside to watch the house. If you are lying, Stone, I will know. Watch all you want. Will not change the truth. After they left, Elijah let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. William emerged from the basement, his face grave. That was close, too close. Elijah looked at Margaret. Thank you. That was quick thinking. I have had practice lying to dangerous men. Margaret's smile held no humor. Comes with living in Silver Creek. They descended to the basement where Clara sat with an elderly woman who could only be Ruth Whitfield. She was 68 with white hair falling to her waist and a face carved by time into something both beautiful and fierce. She held Clara's hands and spoke softly, words of comfort and grief. When Elijah entered, Ruth looked up, her eyes sharp as obsidian. She studied him with uncomfortable intensity. Then she spoke in English, heavily accented but clear. You are the one called Iron Hand, the soldier who would not kill women. How do you know that we know the names of soldiers who showed mercy? There were not many. You were one. She stood, a gesture of respect. You saved my granddaughter. For this you have my gratitude and the gratitude of my ancestors." Elijah felt strangely humbled. "I did what anyone should do, but most do not." Ruth moved to an old trunk in the corner and withdrew a piece of deerskin twin to the one Clara carried. When placed together, they formed a complete map. "This shows the way to Whitfield Valley. It is where our family was born 500 years ago, where our history is painted on stone. Silas Blackwood wants the silver beneath it. He will destroy everything to get it." Elijah studied the map. Devil's Backbone Canyon, Thunder Pass, Eagle Rock, Eagle's Nest Trail, 70 miles of hard country, 5 days' ride with good horses and no trouble, longer with Clara injured. "When does he plan to strike the full moon?" "August 20th, when our family gathers to honor the dead." Ruth's voice hardened. "He has hired 15 gunmen. They will kill anyone who comes to the valley. 15 men. Elijah did the math. "We need help." "My cousin Samuel is there," Clara said. 10 men wait at Eagle Rock. I sent a smoke signal last night from the roof." Elijah looked at her with new respect. "You planned ahead. I am not foolish enough to face 15 guns with hope and courage alone." Clara's smile was grim. "But 10 of our men, plus whoever you can gather, that is better odds." William cleared his throat. "Sheriff Henry Dawson is a good man. He will help if you give him evidence of Blackwood's crimes." "I have no evidence." "But I do." Everyone turned. In the basement doorway stood a man Elijah had not noticed before, 50 years old, thin as a rail, the ink-stained fingers of an accountant. "My name is Thomas Bennett. I was Silas Blackwood's bookkeeper until yesterday." He held up a leather portfolio. "I kept copies of everything, including the payment he made in early May of 1873, for a job at the Stone Ranch. $500 paid to a man named Crane, with a note that said, 'For firework.'" The room went silent. Elijah felt his vision narrow, his hearing compressed to a single point. "What did you say Blackwood ordered the fire that killed your wife and daughter?" Thomas's voice shook. "Crane and his men were supposed to just burn the barn, scare you into selling your land for his price, but they were drunk and careless. I found the receipt in his files. I have been carrying the guilt for 3 years." Elijah sat down hard on the stairs. 3 years. 3 years of believing it was random violence, bad luck, a tragic accident. And all along Silas Blackwood had murdered his family because Elijah would not sell his land for the price Blackwood wanted to pay. Clara touched his shoulder carefully. "Elijah." He looked up at her, saw the understanding in her eyes. She knew this grief. She had lived it when attackers killed her brother, when violence took someone she loved without reason or warning. "Blackwood took everything from me. Then take everything from him." Her voice was quiet steel. "Help me save Whitfield Valley. Then we will make sure he faces justice." Elijah stood. The grief was still there, would always be there. But beneath it ran a current of purpose that felt clean and right. Sarah's last words echoed in his memory. Never let anyone die alone. She would not want him to abandon Clara for revenge. She would want him to save lives first, settle accounts second. "All right." He looked at Thomas. "You will testify." "Yes. I cannot carry this guilt any more." "Good." Elijah turned to William. "Can you get Sheriff Dawson here quietly? I can." 20 minutes later, Henry Dawson sat in the Hayes basement examining Thomas's documents. The sheriff was 52, with a silver mustache and the patient demeanor of a man who had learned that justice moved slowly but arrived eventually. "This is enough to arrest Blackwood, but he has got 15 hired guns. My 4 deputies cannot match that." "You will not need to match it," Elijah said. "Just delay him. We are going to Whitfield Valley first. Set up defenses, perform Clara's ceremony, wait for Blackwood to come to us. Then we take him on ground of our choosing." Dawson studied the map. "That is 70 miles through hard country. I know the trails, and Clara knows them even better. When do we leave tomorrow?" "Dawn. August 14th. That gives us 6 days before the full moon." Elijah looked around the room at the unlikely allies fate had assembled. A wounded woman, a white doctor and his wife, a disgraced accountant, a sheriff, and a mountain man with a dead wife's promise to keep. Anyone who comes faces real danger. Blackwood will not hesitate to kill. "I am coming," William said immediately. "I am a doctor. You will need one." "I am coming too," Margaret added before her husband could object. "I taught Clara to read. I taught her to trust. I will not abandon her now." Dawson nodded. "I will bring my deputies, 4 good men who actually believe in the law." Ruth placed her hand on Elijah's arm. "You have a good heart, Iron Hand, not a heart that kills, a heart that protects. That is the true warrior spirit." She drew ashes from the cold fireplace and marked Elijah's forehead with a symbol he did not recognize. Clara watched and explained softly. "The mark of the protector. You are accepted by our ancestors now." Elijah felt the weight of that acceptance settle on his shoulders like a mantle. "Then let us make sure those ancestors stay protected." That night, Elijah and Clara sat on the roof of the Hayes house, having climbed through a second-story window to avoid the guard Crane had posted below. The stars over Colorado burned with a clarity impossible in more humid lands, the Milky Way, a river of light flowing overhead. "Your wife," Clara said quietly. "Tell me about her." "More than just that, she died." Elijah was silent for a long moment, then spoke. "Sarah was strong, 5'4" but afraid of nothing. When we first married in '68, a black bear came near the ranch. I grabbed my rifle. She stopped me, said the bear was just hungry. That killing should be the last choice, not the first. She put food out 100 yards from the house. Bear ate and left. Nobody got hurt. She sounds wise. She was. She taught me that courage is not about not being afraid. It is about doing the right thing even when you are terrified." Elijah touched the wedding ring around his neck. "The day she died, neighbors said she ran back into the burning house trying to save Lily. Did not make it, but she tried." Clara reached out slowly and touched his hand where it rested on the roof tiles. "She would be proud of you now. You are doing what she taught." "I hope so." Elijah looked at her. This woman he had known for barely 2 days, but who felt somehow familiar. "What about you? What brought you to this duty?" Clara stared at the stars. "When I was young, I believed that all people could live together, that kindness could overcome cruelty. Then, men burned my family's home because they wanted our land, killed people I loved, and I learned that some men care nothing for kindness. I am sorry. After that, I swore never to trust strangers again, and I kept that oath until I met you." She looked at him. "You have given me something I thought was gone forever." "What is that hope? That not all promises are lies." They sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, hands loosely clasped. Below them, Silver Creek's lights flickered like earthbound stars. Above, the real stars wheeled in their ancient dance, and between them an understanding grew that needed no words. Tomorrow they would ride into danger. Tomorrow they would face men who wanted them dead. But tonight, for a few hours, they had peace. And sometimes in a hard world that offered few certainties, that was the miracle that mattered most. Dawn came too quickly. The posse assembled in the pre-dawn darkness behind the Hayes house. Elijah counted heads as they gathered. Clara, with her wounded shoulder bound tight and her jaw set with determination. Sheriff Henry Dawson checking his rifle with the practiced ease of a man who had carried one for 30 years. 4 deputies, including young Will Carson, whose leg Elijah had helped save 2 winters past. Dr. William Hayes with his medical bag strapped to his saddle. Thomas Bennett, the accountant, clutching a pistol he barely knew how to use. And Margaret Hayes, who had refused every argument against her coming. 10 people against Blackwood's 15, with allies waiting at Eagle Rock. The odds were not good, but they were better than nothing. They rode out as the sky turned gray, taking the back trails to avoid notice. Behind them, Silver Creek slept off its nightly debauchery. Ahead, 70 miles of desert and mountain waited to test them. And in his office above the Grand Hotel, Silas Blackwood received word that Stone had left town with companions unknown. He smiled his snake smile and told Crane to gather the men. "They are headed for Whitfield Valley." "Good. Let them go." We will kill them all there and claim they never arrived. No witnesses, no problems. The first day's ride took them through Devil's Backbone Canyon. The canyon earned its name honestly, a narrow slash through red stone that rose 200 feet on either side, creating a corridor so tight that riders had to proceed single file. The walls trapped heat like a blacksmith's forge, turning the midday sun into a physical weight that pressed down on shoulders and stole breath from lungs. By noon, the temperature had climbed past 100 degrees. The only mercy was the thin strip of shade that moved along the eastern wall as the sun tracked westward. Elijah led the column, his eyes constantly scanning the rocks above for ambush points. Behind him rode Clara, then Sheriff Dawson, the 4 deputies, Dr. Hayes, Thomas Bennett, and Margaret bringing up the rear. 10 people, 12 horses counting the pack animals, moving through country where water was scarce and mistakes were fatal. They had been riding for 6 hours when Clara touched Elijah's shoulder and pointed ahead. "Stop. The horses need water. But there is no spring on the map for 10 more miles." Elijah raised his hand and the column halted. Ash's flanks were dark with sweat. The other horses looked no better. "We will have to ration what we are carrying." "No." Clara dismounted carefully. Favoring her wounded shoulder, she studied the canyon floor, noting things Elijah had missed, a slight green tinge to the brush at the base of the eastern wall, the way certain rocks were stained darker than their neighbors, a pair of hawks circling overhead in lazy spirals. "There." She pointed to a spot against the wall. "Dig 2 feet down. You will find water." Deputy Will Carson looked skeptical. "Ma'am, begging your pardon, but there is nothing there but dirt and rocks. Your eyes see dirt and rocks. Mine see what the land is saying." Clara walked to the spot she had indicated and knelt, pressing her palm to the ground. "My family has lived here for generations. We learned to read the desert like you read books. Trust me." Elijah did not hesitate. He pulled a small spade from his pack and began to dig. Will joined him after a moment, and within 10 minutes they had excavated a shallow hole 2 feet deep. At 18 inches the soil turned damp. At 24 inches, water began to seep up, clear and cold despite the desert heat. "Well, I will be." Carson removed his hat and stared at Clara with something close to awe. "How in the world did you know that was there?" "The hawks showed me. They circle where water draws small animals. The rocks told me. The green plants confirmed it." Clara smiled slightly, the expression transforming her severe features into something warmer. "Your people know cattle and guns. My people know the earth." Sheriff Dawson filled his canteen and took a long drink. "Some folks know this land better than any map, better than any surveyor." He looked at the deputies. "Remember that. Skill comes in different forms." It was a small moment, a fragment of respect offered and accepted, but it mattered. Elijah saw the deputies' expressions shift from weariness to curiosity, saw Margaret Hayes smile with quiet satisfaction, saw Clara stand a little straighter, her chin lifting with pride. They watered the horses and refilled their containers, then pressed on. That night they made camp in a sheltered hollow surrounded by boulders. No fire in case Blackwood had scouts in the area. Cold food and warm water with lookouts posted in shifts. Clara taught the deputies how to make trail bread, a simple mixture of cornmeal and honey and seeds that could be cooked quickly on hot stones. Will Carson tried to replicate her technique and produced something that looked like charcoal and smelled worse. Clara examined his effort with exaggerated seriousness. "You should keep to shooting. Cooking is not your gift." Will laughed, a sound of genuine amusement rather than embarrassment. "Yes, ma'am. Though I might shoot better than I cook, and I am not much of a shot. Then perhaps you should practice both." But Clara was smiling, and the rest of the group joined in the laughter. It was the first light moment since leaving Silver Creek, and it broke some of the tension that had been building. Elijah watched from a few yards away, noting how Clara was becoming part of the group rather than just the person they were protecting. The deputies were asking about tracking techniques. Dr. Hayes was inquiring about medicinal plants. Even Thomas Bennett, nervous and jumpy as a spooked rabbit, seemed to relax in her presence. Sheriff Dawson sat down beside Elijah. "She has a gift, building bridges between people. Not everyone has that. She is strong in ways that have nothing to do with muscles." Elijah surprised himself by defending her to someone who was not attacking her. "She has survived things that would have broken most people. So have you." Elijah was silent for a long time. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I am just pretending until I actually believe it." Dawson placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "That is how most of us get through, pretending long enough that it becomes true." He stood. "Do not throw away a chance at happiness because you are too busy being noble. I have got eyes. I see how you two look at each other." Day 2 brought trouble. They had reached the approaches to Thunder Pass by late morning, a narrow route between two peaks that formed a natural choke point on the way to Eagle Rock. Elijah had planned to bypass the main trail and take a hidden route that Clara knew, but first they needed to scout ahead. 5 of Blackwood's men were waiting at the mouth of the pass. The ambush was well planned, hidden positions in the rocks, clear fields of fire covering the approach. If Elijah's group had ridden straight in, they would have been cut down before they knew what was happening. But Elijah had learned caution in the cavalry, had learned to send scouts ahead, had learned that the trail you could see was often the trail that killed you. Clara spotted the ambush first, her eyes picking out details invisible to less trained observers: disturbed dust on a rock ledge, the glint of sunlight on metal, the unnatural stillness of horses hidden behind a boulder. 5 men. She whispered. 2 on the left ridge, 3 behind the rocks on the right. Professional positioning. "We could go around," Dawson suggested. "Avoid the fight entirely." "No." Elijah studied the terrain. "If we leave them here, they will follow us, hit us when we are tired and vulnerable. Better to deal with them now when we have the advantage of surprise." "What advantage?" Thomas Bennett asked, his voice tight with fear. "They are the ones with the ambush. They are expecting targets riding blind into their kill zone. They are not expecting targets who know where they are and have a plan." The plan was simple, dangerous but simple. Clara and 2 of the deputies would circle wide to the left, climbing the ridge to come at the ambushers from above and behind. Elijah and Dawson would approach from the front, making themselves visible, drawing the ambushers' attention. When Clara's group was in position, they would open fire, catching the enemy in a crossfire from which there was no escape. It almost worked perfectly. Clara led Will Carson and another deputy named Ben Hayes up the ridge with the silent skill of someone who had grown up hunting in these mountains. They moved from cover to cover, using every shadow, every fold in the terrain, making no sound that would alert the men below. Elijah and Dawson rode forward at a walking pace, talking loudly about nothing in particular. 2 travelers unaware of the danger ahead. Easy targets. The ambushers took the bait. Elijah heard the click of a rifle being cocked, saw the barrel emerging from behind a rock 30 yards ahead. Time slowed the way it always did in moments of violence. Every detail sharp, every sensation heightened. Now. He threw himself from the saddle as the first shot cracked past his head, rolled behind a boulder, Winchester already in his hands. Above the ambushers, Clara's group opened fire. The crossfire was devastating. 2 of Blackwood's men went down in the first seconds, caught between fire from above and fire from the front. A third tried to run and caught a bullet from Dawson's rifle. He fell and did not move. The remaining 2 threw down their weapons, hands raised, voices crying surrender. It was over in less than a minute, but victory had its price. Deputy Ben Hayes lay on the ridge with a bullet wound in his shoulder, not fatal, but serious. Dr. Hayes scrambled up the slope to tend to his namesake. No relation, but the coincidence of names had always amused both men, and one of the scouts had escaped, slipping away in the confusion, riding hard for Blackwood's main force with news of what had happened. "They know we are coming now," Dawson said grimly. "The element of surprise is gone. It was never really ours to keep." Elijah looked at the bodies on the ground, men who had chosen violence and found its consequences. "Blackwood knew we were heading for the valley the moment we left Silver Creek. All we have done is reduce his numbers by 4. And lost one of ours." Clara nodded toward Ben Hayes, who sat pale-faced while the doctor bandaged his shoulder. "He cannot ride, not fast enough to keep up. We cannot leave him." "No, but we can split up." The decision was made within the hour. Deputy Hayes would stay behind with Dr. Hayes and Margaret to tend his wound. They would follow at whatever pace Ben could manage. The rest would push ahead to Eagle Rock, where Samuel and his men waited. It was not ideal. Splitting their force reduced their strength at every point, but there was no better option. Ben Hayes could not ride hard, and they could not afford to wait. Before they parted, Margaret pulled Clara aside. "You be careful out there. I did not teach you to read just to have you die in some canyon. I will be careful." Clara embraced the older woman. "Thank you for everything. Thank me by surviving, and by bringing that mountain man back alive, too. I see how he looks at you." Clara's cheeks colored slightly. "We barely know each other. Sometimes that is all it takes. When you know, you know." Margaret smiled. "Life is short. Do not waste it being careful with your heart." They rode hard after that, pushing the horses as fast as the terrain allowed, racing against time and Blackwood's forces, racing toward allies who might already be under attack. The sun was setting when they reached Eagle Rock. The landmark was impossible to miss. A massive stone formation that rose from the valley floor like a raptor frozen in flight. Erosion had carved the granite into the unmistakable shape of an eagle. Wings spread, head turned to survey its domain. It was sacred to Clara's family, a meeting place and marker on ancient trails. As the posse approached, 10 men materialized from behind the rocks. They moved with the fluid silence of hunters, armed with a mix of rifles and traditional weapons. Every one of them looked capable of using those weapons with deadly efficiency. The leader stepped forward, and Elijah recognized the type even if he did not know the man. A warrior in his prime, 35 or so, scarred face that told stories of battles survived, eyes hard as the stone eagle above them. "Clara," the warrior's voice carried authority, "granddaughter of Ruth Whitfield. Why do you bring strangers to our meeting place?" Clara dismounted and walked forward without hesitation. She spoke rapidly, words Elijah could not follow. He caught only fragments, his name, words that meant save and promise and trust. The warrior's expression did not soften, but something shifted in his stance. Finally, Clara switched to English. "Samuel, these men fight with us. They protect the valley. Elijah Stone saved my life when Blackwood's men would have killed me." Samuel's gaze locked on Elijah. "Stone, I have heard this name. You refused to attack a village with women and children. The other soldiers called you coward. You were punished." "Yes." Elijah made no attempt to defend himself or justify the past. "I refused an order I believed was wrong, got demoted for it. And now you help us against your own kind. I help people who need help against men who need stopping." Elijah dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Blackwood murdered my wife and daughter 3 years ago. He wants to destroy your sacred valley for silver. That makes him my enemy as much as yours." Samuel studied him for a long moment, then did something unexpected. He reached down and unstrapped the rifle from his saddle, pulled it free. The deputies tensed, hands moving toward their own weapons. But Samuel simply laid the rifle on the ground at his feet, an offering of trust. Elijah understood the gesture. He removed his own Winchester and placed it beside Samuel's. 2 rifles side by side in the dust, weapons set aside in favor of alliance. "You may fight with us," Samuel said, "but if you betray us, I will kill you myself." "Fair enough." Elijah extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Samuel gripped it. The warrior's handshake could have crushed stone. The tension broke. Samuel's men came forward to examine the posse, particularly curious about the presence of white men willing to fight alongside them. One of the younger warriors, barely 20, spoke to Clara in rapid words. She translated for the group. "He asks why white men come to fight for us. He says it makes no sense. Tell him that some wrongs are too big to ignore." Sheriff Dawson stepped forward. "And some men are too evil to let walk free. Blackwood would kill anyone who stands in his way. Does not matter what color their skin is. Evil does not discriminate. Neither should justice. Clara translated. The young warrior looked thoughtful, then nodded slowly, something approaching respect entering his eyes. Samuel laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. The lawman speaks wisdom. Good. We will need all the wisdom we can find. They made camp at Eagle Rock, combining supplies and sharing information. Samuel's warriors contributed fresh meat from a deer they had killed that morning. The posse shared coffee and ammunition, slowly, carefully. Two groups who had every historical reason to distrust each other began to function as a unit. That night, as the combined force of 20 people sat around carefully hidden fires, Samuel approached Elijah. I have something to tell you, words for a warrior to carry. Elijah looked up from the coffee he was nursing. I am listening. Samuel sat cross-legged across the fire, his scarred face serious in the flickering light. In my family we have a saying, the greatest warrior is not the one who kills the most enemies. The greatest warrior is the one who protects the most people. He paused, letting the words settle. You could have ridden past Clara, left her to die, saved yourself the danger of helping her. But you did not. That is the mark of a true warrior. The words hit Elijah harder than he expected. All his life he had measured himself against the standards of the cavalry, where success meant body counts and territory taken. The idea that protection mattered more than victory was new, and strangely comforting. Thank you, Elijah said quietly. That means more than you know. It is truth. Remember it when the fighting comes, because fighting will come soon. Dawn of August 17th brought rain. Not the gentle rain of spring, but the violent downpour of a mountain storm. Thunder rolled across the peaks like artillery. Lightning split the sky in jagged bolts. Water fell in sheets so thick that a man could barely see his hand in front of his face. They rode anyway. Eagle's Nest Trail waited. The hidden path that would take them to the valley without passing through Thunder Pass, where Blackwood's main force was surely waiting. The trail earned its name, a narrow track carved into a cliff face that rose and fell with the mountain's contours. At its narrowest points barely 3 feet wide, at its most exposed nothing but empty air on one side and vertical rock on the other. Single file. Samuel called back over the thunder. Watch your horses' feet. If they slip, do not try to save them. Let them go. Your life matters more. It was brutal advice, but necessary. They strung out along the trail, each rider 20 feet behind the one ahead, moving at a pace that felt agonizingly slow. The rain made the stones slick as ice. Every step was a gamble. Every moment held the possibility of disaster. An hour into the climb, the first accident happened. One of the pack horses carrying water and ammunition lost its footing on a patch of loose stone. The animal scrambled, hooves scraping rock, then slid sideways off the trail. It fell without sound, tumbling end over end until it hit the rocks 300 feet below. The impact echoed up the cliff face like a gunshot. They had lost perhaps a third of their supplies with that single misstep. Clara studied what remained with worried eyes. We have enough water for 2 days, maybe 3 if we are careful. The valley has springs. If we reach it in time, we will be fine. And if we do not reach it in time, then we will be thirsty when we die. There was nothing to do but press on. The afternoon brought worse. The trail wound around a knife-edge ridge where wind howled with enough force to push a man off balance. Riders had to dismount and lead their horses, trusting hooves to find purchase on stone that seemed smooth as glass, 1 foot in front of the other, eyes forward, never looking down, breathing steady despite hearts hammering against ribs. Thomas Bennett, the accountant, slipped once, his boot sliding on wet gravel. For a heart-stopping moment he teetered on the edge, arms windmilling, a scream building in his throat. Samuel, moving with startling speed, grabbed his shirt and hauled him back to safety. Bennett stood gasping, pale as milk, while Samuel simply nodded and continued forward. No words needed. The warrior had saved a man's life without hesitation, and that action said more than any speech about the alliance they had formed. By late afternoon they reached a section where the trail widened enough to make camp. Not comfortable, but survivable. They had climbed perhaps 900 feet, and ahead the path disappeared around a curve in the rock face. Tomorrow would bring more climbing, more danger, but they would face it with daylight. That night, huddled in blankets against the cold that came with altitude, Elijah sat with Clara slightly apart from the others. "Tell me about the valley," he said. "Not the tactical aspects, what it means to your family." Clara was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. 500 years ago, maybe more, the first of my ancestors came to that valley. The elders say it was a time of war and migration, families moving and fighting for territory. Our ancestors found the valley and knew it was special. She paused, allowing the words to settle. The water from the spring has power. It heals sickness. The caves hold paintings from every generation since, stories told in ochre and charcoal on stone. When someone dies, we add their story to the walls. My father is there, painted by my mother before she died. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, back 20 generations. She turned to look at him directly. If Blackwood destroys, that he destroys the only proof that we existed here first. White men write history in books. We write it on sacred stone. Without that stone, we have no voice. Elijah felt the weight of that truth. So this is not about land or silver. It is about memory, about proving you belong here. Yes, and you, a stranger, are helping us prove it. That is why what you do matters so much. Sarah taught me that we are all just people trying to survive. The lines we draw do not matter as much as we pretend. What matters is whether you help or hurt, build or destroy. Elijah reached for her hand, found it waiting. Blackwood destroys. So I stand against him. And you build and preserve and protect. So I stand with you. You loved her very much, your wife. I did. I do. But I am learning that the heart is bigger than we think. There is room to honor the past and still live in the present. He squeezed her hand. You are part of my present now, and I hope my future. Clara leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. In my family's tradition, when someone saves your life twice, they become part of your spirit. You saved me from Blackwood's men. You saved me from despair. That makes you part of me, and you are part of me. They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, watching stars emerge as the storm clouds parted. The desert night brought cold that was almost shocking after the day's ordeal, but their joined hands created a small warmth between them. 200 yards away, hidden behind a boulder outcropping, one of Blackwood's scouts watched through a telescope. He had been tracking the posse since they left Silver Creek, staying far enough back to avoid detection. Now he counted heads, noted Clara's position, recognized the distinctive profile of Elijah Stone, information Blackwood would pay well to receive. The scout withdrew silently and rode hard for Thunder Pass, where Blackwood's main force was camped. He would reach them by dawn with news that would shape the coming battle. But Elijah and Clara knew nothing of this yet. They sat under the stars, two people from different worlds finding common ground in shared grief and growing trust. The future would bring violence and difficult choices, but for this moment they had peace. The final section of Eagle's Nest Trail on August 18th tested them harder than anything before. The path dropped suddenly, switchbacking down a cliff face so steep that riders had to trust their horses completely. Control was an illusion. The animals picked their way down with careful precision, while their riders simply tried not to interfere. 2 hours of nerve-shredding descent brought them to level ground. Ahead, through a gap in the rocks, they caught their first glimpse of Whitfield Valley. Even from a distance it was beautiful, a splash of green in the brown and red desert, fed by springs that had flowed for millennia. Trees clustered near water, grass-covered patches of ground, and at the north end, barely visible, the dark mouth of a cave cut into the rock face. "There," Clara breathed. "That is home." They entered the valley cautiously. Samuel's warriors spread out to check for ambush, but the valley was empty of human presence, holding only the whisper of wind through branches and the trickle of water over stone. It felt sacred, set apart, a place where the world slowed down and breathed differently. Clara dismounted at the cave entrance and stood motionless for a long moment. Then she knelt and pressed her forehead to the ground. speaking softly in words Elijah did not understand but somehow felt in his bones. Samuel and his warriors did the same, a gesture of respect and homecoming. Elijah remained on horseback, feeling like an intruder. This was not his moment, not his heritage. But Clara looked up and gestured for him to approach. "Come, you have earned the right to see." He dismounted and followed her into the cave. Darkness swallowed them for a few steps. Then Samuel lit a torch and the walls came alive with color. Paintings covered every surface, layers upon layers of images. Hunters pursuing deer, warriors on horseback, women grinding corn, children playing, births and deaths and everything between. All captured in ochre red and charcoal black and clay white and mineral yellow. 500 years, Clara said softly. Every generation adds their story. She indicated a figure on horseback painted with special care. "This is my father. My mother made this the day after he died. See how his hand reaches toward the sun." She meant he had joined the sky spirits. Elijah studied the paintings with growing awe. This was not primitive scrawling. This was art, history, memory made permanent. Every figure told a story. Every scene preserved a moment that would otherwise be lost to time. "If Blackwood blows this up to mine silver," he said quietly, "all of this disappears forever. Yes, that is why we fight. Not for land, for memory, for proof we existed." Clara touched the wall gently. "My children's children should know who came before, what we believed, how we lived." Samuel stepped forward and placed his hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You have helped protect this place. You have earned the right to stand here with us." Elijah felt the weight of that honor, understanding that acceptance was not given lightly. "Now you are part of the valley," Clara said softly, "part of our story." They spent the next hours preparing defenses. Elijah drew on his cavalry training, identifying fields of fire and defensive positions. Samuel's warriors contributed knowledge of the terrain, pointing out natural choke points and approaches. Together they created a plan that used the valley's geography to their advantage. By nightfall they were as ready as they could be. Barriers of stone blocked the two main entrances. Lookouts watched from high positions. Weapons were cleaned and loaded, water and food distributed. Everyone knew their role in the coming fight. Sheriff Dawson and his group arrived just after dawn on August 19th. They rode in hard and looked like they had been through hell, which Elijah realized as they dismounted was not far from the truth. Dawson had a blood-soaked bandage wrapped around his left thigh. Dr. Hayes looked exhausted. Margaret Hayes had dust in her hair and determination in her eyes. Deputy Ben Hayes sat in his saddle, pale but upright. His wound had not slowed him as much as they had feared. "What happened?" Elijah asked. Helping Dawson down from his horse, ran into more of Blackwood's scouts on the way, 5 of them. "We drove them off, but it cost us time." Dawson grimaced as he put weight on his wounded leg. "We slowed them down, killed 2, wounded 1. But Blackwood knows we are here now. He will come at us with everything he has got. We will be ready." Elijah looked around the valley. The defensive positions, the Allies preparing for battle. "How much time do we have?" "Sunset is around 7:30, full dark by 8. I would expect them around 9. Give them time to get into position." Dawson accepted a canteen from Margaret and drank deeply. "They will come from multiple directions. Try to overwhelm us with firepower." Samuel nodded grimly. "Let them come. This is our land. We know every stone, every shadow. They will be blind in the darkness. We will not." At 3 in the afternoon, a single rider appeared on the western rim of the valley. He carried a white flag, the universal symbol of truce. Elijah recognized Marcus Crane even at distance. "I will go talk to him," Elijah said. "Not alone you will not." Sheriff Dawson checked his pistol. "That is what they will expect. Then they shoot you and claim you broke the truce." In the end, Elijah and Dawson and Samuel walked out to meet Crane, who had dismounted and stood waiting with his hands visible and empty. Up close, the man looked different than he had in Silver Creek, harder, more tired. Something haunted lived behind his eyes. Stone. Sheriff. Crane nodded to each of them. And I do not know you, but you look like family of the girl. Samuel Whitfield. War leader. Samuel's English was heavily accented but clear. You come to surrender? Crane actually laughed, though the sound held no humor. No. I come with an offer from Mr. Blackwood. He knows you are dug in, knows this will be bloody if we fight, so he is willing to make a deal. You give him the girl and the map. He will let everyone else go free. No bloodshed, no bodies, no. Elijah did not hesitate. Tell Blackwood if he wants Clara, he will have to go through all of us. I figured you would say that. Crane shifted his weight, and for a moment he looked almost uncomfortable. Listen, Stone, I know what Blackwood did to your family. I know you have got cause for hate, but this fight here, it is bigger than revenge. You have got good people with you, that doctor, that woman who teaches. They are going to die if you push this. Then Blackwood should leave, take his men and go. No one has to die. You know he will not do that. Crane looked past Elijah to where the valley lay green and peaceful in the afternoon sun. $500,000 in silver down there. Maybe more. A man like Blackwood does not walk away from that kind of money. Sheriff Dawson spoke up. Then you tell Mr. Blackwood that the law is here. I am an authorized representative of the territorial government. If he attacks, he is not just fighting civilians. He is attacking a lawman in the execution of his duties. That is a hanging offense. Blackwood does not care much about the law. He has got a judge in his pocket, enough money to buy his way out of most anything. Crane looked at Elijah directly. But you already knew that, did you not? You knew from the start this was going to end in blood. I knew Blackwood would not stop unless someone stopped him. That is why we are here. To stop him. Elijah met Crane's gaze steadily. You were cavalry once. You swore an oath to protect people, not murder them for profit. You still got that oath inside you somewhere? Something flickered in Crane's expression. Pain, maybe, or regret. That oath got me dishonorably discharged. I followed orders at Sand Creek, did what I was told. Then they called it a massacre and threw me out like garbage. His voice hardened. So no, I do not have that oath anymore. I have got survival. That is all. Sand Creek was a massacre. You helped kill women and children. That is not following orders. That is murder. Elijah kept his voice level, stating facts rather than making accusations. But you can still choose differently now. You can walk away from Blackwood, refuse to be part of another slaughter. Cannot do that. I owe him too much. He is the only one who gave me work when everyone else called me a monster. Crane backed toward his horse. I will tell him you refused the deal. Come 9 o'clock we will settle this the hard way. He paused before mounting. For what it is worth, I am sorry it has to be this way. He rode off without waiting for a response. As Crane disappeared over the ridge, something nagged at Elijah's mind. The way Crane had hesitated before mounting. The shadow of doubt in his eyes when he mentioned Sand Creek. Perhaps the man was not as lost as he pretended to be. The three men stood watching until he disappeared over the ridge. He is conflicted, Dawson observed. Might be we could turn him given time. We do not have time, Samuel said bluntly, and his conflict does not matter if he still pulls the trigger. They returned to the valley and made final preparations. The sun crawled toward the horizon with agonizing slowness, as if reluctant to bring the darkness that would carry violence. Everyone felt the tension, the waiting becoming almost worse than the prospect of battle. Elijah found Clara in the cave, sitting before the wall paintings with her eyes closed. He sat beside her without speaking, offering his presence as comfort. After a few minutes, she opened her eyes and looked at him. Whatever happens tonight, I want you to know something. You have given me hope, real hope. Not the fragile kind that shatters when tested. The strong kind that survives even when things are darkest. She took his hand. Thank you for that. You gave me hope too. Reminded me that life can still surprise you with good things, even after it has taken so much away. Elijah squeezed her hand. We are going to survive this. We are going to protect the valley. And then we are going to figure out what comes next. Together. I believe you. Good. Hold on to that belief. It is armor when the bullets start flying. Sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, turning the valley into something from a dream. Then darkness fell like a curtain, swift and complete. The moon would not rise for another 2 hours, leaving them in the kind of blackness that existed only in wild places far from cities. Elijah had distributed the defenders according to their strengths. Samuel's warriors held the high positions, their night vision and knowledge of the terrain making them perfect for the role. The deputies with rifles covered the valley floor from behind stone barriers. Dr. Hayes and Margaret waited in the cave with medical supplies. Thomas Bennett, armed with a pistol he barely knew how to use, guarded the cave entrance. At precisely 9 o'clock, the attack began. It started with gunfire from 3 directions simultaneously. Muzzle flashes blooming in the darkness like deadly flowers. Bullets spanged off rocks and kicked up dirt. Someone screamed. Whether attacker or defender, Elijah could not tell. "Hold your fire," he shouted. "Do not waste ammunition on shadows. Wait for targets." Easier said than done. In the chaos of night combat, every sound seemed like a threat, every shadow a potential enemy. But the defenders held discipline, trusting Elijah's cavalry experience and their own preparation. The first attacker to trip a wire went down hard, his ankle snapping with an audible crack, his scream cutting through the gunfire. 2 more attackers rushed forward to help him and ran directly into Samuel's kill zone. Arrows whispered out of the darkness, silent and deadly. Both men fell without firing a shot. "They are getting torn apart," Deputy Carson called from his position. "We are winning. Do not get cocky," Elijah shouted back. "This is just the opening move. Blackwood is testing us, finding our positions." He was right. The attack broke off after 10 minutes, Blackwood's men retreating beyond rifle range to regroup. In the brief silence that followed, Elijah could hear groans from wounded attackers and the rapid breathing of his own people. "Casualties," he called. Deputy Carson took a graze on the arm. Dawson responded. "One of Samuel's warriors got hit in the shoulder but is still fighting. We are intact." "Good. Reload. They will come again, and they will come harder." The second assault began 20 minutes later. This time Blackwood had changed tactics. Instead of a broad frontal attack, he concentrated his forces on a single point, trying to overwhelm through sheer weight of numbers. 8 men rushed the eastern entrance simultaneously, laying down covering fire while they advanced. It nearly worked. The defenders at that position, 2 of Samuel's warriors and Deputy Carson, found themselves pinned down by accurate rifle fire. The attackers closed to within 30 yards before Elijah and Clara, rushing from their positions, hit them from the flank. Elijah's Winchester spoke 4 times in rapid succession, each shot finding its mark. Clara, wielding her bow with deadly efficiency, sent 3 arrows into the darkness. They heard impacts, curses, the sound of men falling. The assault broke, leaving 2 bodies sprawled on the valley floor and the others limping back to cover. But the cost was high. Deputy Tom Hayes, Jr., the youngest of Dawson's deputies and no relation to the wounded Ben Hayes despite sharing the common surname. Dr. Hayes came running despite the danger, but one look at the wound told Elijah everything he needed to know. The boy had taken a bullet to the throat. He died while Hayes tried frantically to stop the bleeding. "Damn them," Dawson said, his voice breaking as he knelt beside his deputy. "Damn them all to hell." The third attack came from an unexpected direction. While Blackwood kept up a steady rate of fire from the west, 4 men scaled the cliff face on the north side, approaching the cave from above. It was a brilliant tactical move, one that would have succeeded if not for one thing. Thomas Bennett was watching that approach. He saw movement against the stars, shapes silhouetted as they crested the ridge. For a moment he froze, his mind screaming at him to run. Then he thought about the paintings in the cave behind him, about Clara's determination to protect her heritage, about the simple fact that running would accomplish nothing except his own death. Thomas raised his pistol and fired. The range was too great for accuracy with a handgun, but the shot alerted the defenders. Samuel and 3 warriors pivoted, sending a volley of arrows and bullets toward the climbers. 2 men fell immediately. A third lost his grip and plummeted 70 feet to the rocks below. The fourth, showing more sense than courage, retreated back the way he had come. "Good man, Thomas," Elijah shouted. "You just saved the cave." Thomas did not respond, too busy being sick from fear and adrenaline. But he stayed at his post, pistol reloaded and ready. The battle settled into an exhausting stalemate. Blackwood's men could not advance without taking unacceptable casualties. The defenders could not pursue without abandoning their positions. Both sides exchanged sporadic fire, more to keep pressure on than with any real hope of decisive results. Then at 10 o'clock the moon rose. Pale silver light flooded the valley, turning the landscape into something from a fever dream. Shadows became sharper, movements more visible, and in that light Elijah saw Silas Blackwood himself, standing on a boulder 200 yards away, clearly visible in a long black duster, directing his men's fire. The range was long for a Winchester, but Elijah had made longer shots. He settled the rifle against his shoulder, controlled his breathing, compensated for wind and distance. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then a hand touched his arm. Clara, her face pale in the moonlight, shook her head. "No, that is murder, not justice. If you kill him from ambush, you are no better than he is. He murdered my wife and daughter. He deserves to die. Yes, he does. But not like this. Not shot in the back when he cannot defend himself." Clara's eyes held his. "You told me Sarah taught you about courage, about doing right things, even when they are hard. Killing Blackwood this way is easy. Facing him is hard." Elijah held her gaze for a long moment, then slowly lowered the rifle. She was right. He knew it, even as every fiber of his being screamed for revenge. Sarah would not want him to win through assassination. She would want justice, not murder. "All right," he said quietly. "We do it your way." He stood, making himself visible in the moonlight, and shouted across the valley, "Blackwood, this is Elijah Stone. I know you are out there. I know what you did to my family, and I am giving you one chance to end this without more bloodshed. Surrender. Face trial. Let the law decide your fate." Blackwood's laughter echoed across the rocks, cruel and mocking. "The law. You think I am afraid of the law? I own the judge. I own half the politicians in the territory. The law is whatever I say it is. Not anymore." Sheriff Dawson stepped into view beside Elijah. "I am territorial law. I have jurisdiction here, and I am placing you under arrest for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted theft of protected land. Surrender now, and maybe you will not hang. You are fools, Dawson and Stone both. This valley is worth $500,000. You think I am going to let it go because some broken-down sheriff waves a badge at me?" Blackwood pulled a pistol from his belt. "I will make you a counteroffer. I will pay $50,000 to any man who brings me Stone's head and the girl alive. $50,000, more money than any of you will see in 10 lifetimes." Silence fell. Elijah could feel the hesitation in some of his people, the pull of that money, the temptation of easy wealth. $50,000 was a fortune, enough to buy a ranch, enough to retire in luxury, enough to tempt even good men to do terrible things. No amount of money is enough. The voice came from the darkness to the west, where Blackwood's men were positioned. Marcus Crane stepped into the moonlight, hands raised and empty. "It is over, Blackwood. I am not killing for you anymore, and neither are 4 others. They left an hour ago, riding as far from this massacre as they can get." Crane turned toward the valley. "You have got 10 men left, maybe fewer. They have got 20 defenders who know every inch of this ground. Simple arithmetic, boss. You have lost." Blackwood's face twisted with rage, the reptilian expression transforming into something wild and dangerous. "You betray me. After everything I have done for you, you gave me work. I was grateful for that. But there are things money cannot buy, like being able to look in the mirror without seeing a monster looking back." Crane walked toward the defenders. "I am done killing for profit." Blackwood raised his pistol, aiming at Crane's retreating back. Elijah was faster. His Winchester barked once. The shot aimed at Blackwood's gun hand, not his heart. The pistol flew from Blackwood's fingers. The man screamed with pain and surprise. "Next move, Blackwood." Elijah's voice carried the cold of steel. "And I will not aim for your hand." The rest happened quickly. Blackwood's remaining men, seeing their leader wounded and their force reduced by desertion, lost the will to fight. They threw down their weapons and raised their hands, choosing prison over death. Sheriff Dawson and his deputies moved forward to secure them, while Elijah and Samuel faced Blackwood. The mining baron knelt in the dust, clutching his wounded hand, his face pale with pain and fury, his eyes burning with hatred that would never die. "You think this changes anything, Stone? I have lawyers. I have connections. I will be out of prison before the year ends. And when I am free again, I will. When you are free again." Elijah interrupted quietly. "You will find that everything has changed. Thomas Bennett is testifying about your crimes, including the payment you made to burn my ranch." He knelt down, bringing his face level with Blackwood's. "My wife and daughter died because you wanted my land. I spent 3 years thinking it was bad luck. Now I know the truth." He stood. "I could kill you now. No one would blame me. But that is not what Sarah would want. She would want justice, not revenge. So you will face trial. You will face a judge who is not in your pocket, and you will face the hangman's noose that the law demands." Blackwood sneered. But behind the contempt there was something else. Fear, perhaps, as the reality of his situation began to sink in. "Silas Blackwood." Dawson approached with handcuffs. "You are under arrest." The battle for Whitfield Valley was over, but the night was not finished yet. As the prisoners were secured and the wounded tended, Elijah stood at the edge of the valley, looking up at the stars that wheeled overhead. The same stars that had watched over this place for 500 years, the same stars that would watch over it for 500 more. Clara came to stand beside him, her hand finding his in the darkness. "It is over." "Not quite. The trial still needs to happen. The valley still needs protection. There is work yet to do. But the fighting is done." "Yes, the fighting is done." They stood in silence. Two people who had found each other through violence and loss, who had built something precious from the ashes of their separate griefs. "What happens now?" Clara asked softly. "Now we rest. Tomorrow we bury our dead and honor their sacrifice. And then we figure out what comes next." Together Elijah turned to look at her. This woman who had changed everything, who had given him a reason to live again after 3 years of merely surviving. Together. He kissed her then, gently, a promise sealed beneath the stars. And somewhere in the cave behind them, the paintings on the walls seemed to glow a little brighter, as if the ancestors themselves were smiling. The story was not finished, but this chapter was complete. And for the first time in a very long time, Elijah Stone felt something he had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Dawn broke over Whitfield Valley with the kind of gentle light that seemed wrong after so much violence. The sky shifted from black to purple to gold. Birds began their morning songs in the cottonwood trees near the spring. The air smelled of sage and pine and the fading smoke of gunpowder. Elijah had not slept. He stood at the valley's eastern rim, watching the sun climb over the mountains. Behind him, the sounds of a camp coming awake, the murmur of voices, the clatter of cookware, the soft whicker of horses greeting the day. They had won. Against all odds, against superior numbers, against a man with seemingly unlimited resources. They had won. But victory always carried a price. Deputy Tom Hayes, Jr. lay wrapped in a blanket near the cave entrance. 19 years old, the youngest of Dawson's deputies. He had joined them because he believed in justice, believed that right should triumph over might, believed that good men had a duty to stand against evil. Now he would never see 20. One of Samuel's warriors had also fallen. a man named Running Deer who had fought with quiet ferocity and died protecting the cave paintings his ancestors had created. His body lay beside Tom's, two men from different worlds united in death as they had been in battle. Elijah heard footsteps behind him and knew without turning that it was Clara. She came to stand beside him, her shoulder pressed against his arm, her hand finding his. "You did not sleep. Neither did you." "I could not. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the fighting, heard the screaming." Clara's voice was quiet, tired. "How do you make it stop? You do not. Not completely. Not." Elijah squeezed her hand. "But it gets easier to carry. The memories never go away, but they become less sharp, less immediate. You learn to live with them the way you learn to live with a scar. Is that what Sarah taught you? That is what losing Sarah taught me? What losing Lily taught me? What 3 years alone in the mountains taught me?" He turned to look at her. "Grief is not something you overcome. It is something you incorporate. It becomes part of who you are, part of what makes you strong." Clara nodded slowly, understanding in her pale gray eyes. "My grandmother told me something similar once. She said that our ancestors live through our memories of them, that as long as we remember, they are never truly gone." She was wise. She still is. Clara almost smiled. "She is probably already awake and preparing for the ceremony. The full moon is tonight. We have much to do before then." They walked back to camp together as the sun continued its climb. The mood among the survivors was subdued, but not defeated. There was grief, yes, but there was also pride. They had faced overwhelming odds and prevailed. They had protected something sacred. They had proven that courage and conviction could triumph over greed and violence. Sheriff Dawson was organizing the prisoners. Blackwood and his remaining men sat in a sullen row, hands bound behind their backs, watched by armed guards who showed no sympathy for their discomfort. Blackwood himself looked diminished in the morning light. His fancy clothes were torn and dirty. His wounded hand was wrapped in a crude bandage. His face bore the pallor of a man who had finally realized that money could not buy his way out of every situation. When Elijah approached, Blackwood looked up with hatred burning in his eyes. "This is not over, Stone. I have lawyers. I have connections. I will be free within a month. And when I am, I will burn this entire valley to the ground. I will destroy everything you have tried to protect. I will make you watch while I do it." Elijah looked at him for a long moment, studying the man who had murdered his family, the man who had caused so much suffering for nothing more than greed. Then he spoke quietly, almost gently. "You know what the difference is between you and me, Blackwood." Blackwood sneered. "I have money. You have nothing." "No. The difference is that I have something worth fighting for, something worth dying for. You have only things worth buying. And when you cannot buy what you want, you try to destroy it." Elijah shook his head. "Men like you never understand men like me. You think everyone has a price because you do. You think loyalty can be purchased because yours can be. You look at this valley and see silver. I look at it and see history, memory, meaning, things your money can never touch." He turned away. "Enjoy your remaining freedom, Blackwood. It will not last long." The preparations for burial began mid-morning. They chose a spot on a gentle hillside overlooking the valley, where the morning sun would warm the graves and the evening shadow would cool them, where wildflowers grew in spring and snow would blanket the earth in winter. 2 graves, side by side. Elijah dug alongside Samuel's warriors, the physical labor a welcome distraction from darker thoughts. Sweat ran down his face and soaked his shirt. His muscles burned with effort, but he did not stop until both graves were deep and straight and ready. They buried Tom Hayes, Jr. first. Sheriff Dawson spoke the words, his voice steady despite the grief that showed in every line of his face. He talked about Tom's courage, his dedication to justice, his belief that one person could make a difference in a world full of wrong. Margaret Hayes wept quietly, supported by her husband. She had known Tom since he was a boy, had watched him grow from a scrawny child into a man who died defending strangers. When Dawson finished, Dr. Hayes led them in a hymn, the old words carrying across the valley, rising toward heaven on the morning breeze. Then they buried Running Deer. Samuel spoke in his native tongue, the words flowing like water over stone, musical and mournful, a farewell to a warrior who had earned his place among the ancestors. Clara translated quietly for those who did not understand. He is telling Running Deer's spirit that his sacrifice will be remembered, that his name will be painted on the cave walls, that his children and his children's children will know what he did here, that he will never be forgotten as long as the valley stands. When Samuel finished, one of the other warriors began to sing, a death song that had been sung for generations, a song that guided spirits to the next world. Elijah stood with his head bowed, feeling the weight of the moment. These two men, from different worlds, different cultures, different lives, they had died together, defending something they believed in. Their blood had mingled in the same soil. Perhaps that meant something. Perhaps it pointed toward a future where such divisions would matter less, where people could judge each other by their actions rather than their origins. Or perhaps it was just two deaths, two lives cut short by violence, two families left to grieve. Elijah did not know, could not know. All he could do was honor their sacrifice and try to be worthy of it. After the burials came the preparation for the ceremony. Ruth Whitfield had arrived with the dawn, escorted by two of Samuel's warriors who had ridden hard through the night to bring her from Silver Creek. She was 68 years old but moved with the energy of a much younger woman. Her white hair braided with ceremonial beads, her face painted with symbols that Elijah did not recognize. She embraced Clara for a long moment, speaking rapidly in words Elijah could not follow. Then she turned to survey the valley, the cave, the defensive positions that still bore scars from the battle. Much blood was spilled here, she said in English, for Elijah's benefit. Much death walked these stones last night. Yes, grandmother. But the valley stands. The paintings survive. The ancestors remain. Ruth nodded slowly, something like satisfaction in her ancient eyes. That is what matters. The blood will be washed away by rain. The scars will heal with time. But the memory of this place, the history written on these walls, that will endure. That is what we fought for. She looked at Elijah directly. You helped make this possible, mountain man. You and your people. You risked everything to protect something that was not yours. It belongs to everyone now, Elijah said quietly. History like this should not be destroyed, should not be forgotten. It does not matter whose ancestors painted those walls. What matters is that they painted them, that they were here, that they lived and loved and died and left something behind. Ruth studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face into something beautiful. You understand. That is rare among your people. Most see only what they can take. You see what should be preserved. I had good teachers. Ruth glanced at Clara. Yes, I see that you did. The day passed quickly, filled with preparations for the ceremony that would take place when the full moon rose. Clara explained the ritual to Elijah as they worked. The ceremony had been performed every generation for 500 years. It renewed the connection between the living and the dead. It asked the ancestors for protection and guidance. It reminded the family of who they were and where they came from. Tonight we add new stories to the walls, Clara said. Running Deer will be painted there. Tom Hayes Jr. too, if Dawson agrees. They died protecting this place. They deserve to be remembered. Dawson will agree, Elijah said. He would consider it an honor. And there is one more thing. Clara hesitated, almost shy. I would like to add you to the walls as well. Not as someone who died, as someone who helped us survive, as someone who stands with us now. Elijah felt something tighten in his chest. I do not deserve that kind of honor. You do. You saved my life. You led the defense of the valley. You chose justice over revenge when you could have killed Blackwood from ambush. Clara took his hands in hers. You are part of this family now, Elijah, whether you want to be or not. The ancestors have accepted you. I have accepted you. Let us make it official. Elijah looked into her winter eyes, saw the sincerity there, the hope, the love that had grown between them despite everything that should have kept them apart. "All right," he said finally, "if you are sure. I have never been more sure of anything." Sunset painted the sky in shades of fire, orange and red and gold, spreading across the western horizon like a promise of things to come. The valley below glowed with the dying light, the cave mouth dark against the illuminated stone. 20 people gathered at the cave entrance: Elijah and Clara, Ruth and Samuel, Sheriff Dawson and his remaining deputies, Dr. Hayes and Margaret, Thomas Bennett, who had proven braver than anyone expected, the surviving warriors who had fought alongside them. Marcus Crane stood slightly apart from the group. He had not been accepted, not fully. His past was too dark for that, but he had been allowed to stay, to witness the ceremony, to see what he had helped protect, even if his help had come late and reluctantly. Perhaps that was a beginning. Perhaps it was all the redemption he could expect. As the last light faded, the full moon rose. It climbed over the eastern peaks like a silver coin, huge and bright, illuminating the valley with pale fire, turning shadows sharp and movements visible. Ruth stepped forward, her voice rising in a chant that had been sung for generations, words older than English, older than Spanish, words that had echoed through this valley when the first Europeans were still living in castles and fighting over crowns. Samuel joined her, then Clara, then the other warriors, voices blending in harmonies that seemed to come from the earth itself. Elijah stood silent, watching, feeling the power of the moment, even if he could not participate directly. This was something ancient, something sacred, something that connected these people to their past in ways that documents and books could never capture. This was living history, memory given voice. The chanting continued as Ruth led the group into the cave. Torches flickered to life, illuminating the paintings that covered every surface, the layers upon layers of images, hunters and warriors, women and children, births and deaths, joy and sorrow. 500 years of human experience captured in ochre and charcoal. Ruth stopped before a blank section of wall. She produced a leather pouch filled with pigments, red and black and white and yellow, the same colors that had been used for generations. Then she began to paint. Her hands moved with surprising steadiness for a woman of her age, the image taking shape stroke by stroke, a warrior on horseback, bow drawn, face turned toward an unseen enemy. "Running deer," she said when the image was complete. "Who gave his life defending this place? Who now rides with the ancestors?" She moved to another section, painted another figure, a young man with a rifle, standing alone against many enemies, Tom Hayes, Jr., who came from a different world, who died for people he did not know, who proved that courage knows no boundary. Dawson stepped forward, tears running down his weathered cheeks. "Thank you." His voice broke. He would be honored. He would be so honored. Ruth nodded, understanding his grief without needing translation. Then she turned to Elijah. "Now you." She gestured for him to kneel before the wall and began to paint his image. It took longer than the others, more detail, more care. When she finished, Elijah saw himself rendered in ancient pigments, a tall figure with a rifle, standing between two worlds, one hand reaching toward a woman with long dark hair. "Iron Hand," Ruth said. "Who kept his promise? Who chose protection over revenge? Who proved that hearts can change, that enemies can become family, that love can grow from the ashes of loss?" She placed her hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You are part of the valley now. Your story is written on these walls. Your name will be remembered as long as the stone stands." Elijah looked at the image of himself, at the woman beside him, at the other figures that surrounded them. He was part of something larger now, something that stretched back 500 years and would continue for 500 more. His grief, his loss, his struggle. All of it was woven into a tapestry of human experience that transcended any single life. Sarah would have understood. She would have been happy for him. "Thank you," he said. The words inadequate but sincere. "I will try to be worthy of this honor." "You already are," Clara said softly. taking his hand. "You have been worthy since the moment you chose to save a stranger instead of riding past." The ceremony continued through the night. Stories were told, songs were sung. The living honored the dead and asked for their guidance. The ancestors were thanked for their protection and invited to watch over the valley for another generation. When dawn finally broke, the group emerged from the cave, exhausted but fulfilled, connected to something larger than themselves. The valley stretched below them, green and peaceful in the morning light. The blood of yesterday's battle already fading into the earth, the scars of violence beginning their slow process of healing. "What happens now?" Elijah asked. "Now we escort the prisoners to Denver," Dawson said. "Federal jurisdiction. Judge Harrison presides there. He cannot be bought. Blackwood will face real justice for the first time in his life. And after that we come back here." Clara squeezed his hand. "We protect the valley. We teach the children the old stories. We build something worth preserving. We, Clara smiled. "Unless you have somewhere else to be." Elijah looked at the valley, at the cave with its ancient paintings, at the woman beside him whose hand fit perfectly in his own. "Number," he said finally. "I do not have anywhere else to be. This is where I belong now." The journey to Denver took 2 weeks. They traveled slowly, carefully. The prisoners required constant watching, and the wounded needed rest. But they made steady progress through the mountain passes and across the high plains. Blackwood remained defiant for the first few days, threatening lawsuits, promising revenge, swearing that his connections would save him from any real consequences. But as the miles passed and Denver grew closer, his confidence began to crack. He started offering bribes, first small amounts, then larger. Finally, absurd sums that no one could possibly believe he possessed. No one accepted. When they reached Denver, Sheriff Dawson handed the prisoners over to federal marshals. Blackwood was taken to the territorial prison to await trial. His remaining men were processed and charged as accomplices. Thomas Bennett's testimony was taken by a federal prosecutor. Every document, every receipt, every damning piece of evidence that proved Blackwood's crimes. The case was airtight. The trial began 3 weeks later in a courtroom packed with spectators. Elijah sat in the back row throughout the proceedings, watching as witness after witness took the stand, hearing the full extent of Blackwood's corruption laid bare. Murder, conspiracy, fraud, bribery, attempted theft of protected lands. Thomas Bennett testified for 2 full days, his voice steady despite obvious fear. He described the payments to Crane, the orders to burn the Stone Ranch, the plans to destroy Whitfield Valley, every dirty secret that Blackwood had thought safely hidden. Sheriff Dawson testified about the attack on the valley, the deaths of his deputy, and the warrior running deer, the brutality of Blackwood's hired killers. Clara testified about her brother's murder, about the terror of being hunted, about Blackwood's intention to destroy 500 years of irreplaceable history for nothing more than silver. And Marcus Crane testified about Sand Creek, about following orders that should have been refused, about slowly realizing that there were lines that should never be crossed, about finally walking away from Blackwood when he understood what the man truly was. When the prosecution rested, the defense had almost nothing to offer. Blackwood's lawyers tried to discredit the witnesses, tried to claim the documents were forged, tried to argue that their client was a respected businessman being persecuted by jealous rivals. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Blackwood screamed obscenities as marshals dragged him away, his face purple with rage, his threats echoing off the walls until he was finally silenced by a closing door. Judge Harrison called for order, then pronounced sentence. "Silas Blackwood, you have been found guilty of murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted theft of protected lands, bribery of public officials, and numerous other crimes too lengthy to list." The judge's voice was cold, precise. "It is the judgment of this court that you be hanged by the neck until dead. Sentence to be carried out within 30 days. Blackwood was still screaming when they took him to death row. Elijah sat in the courtroom for a long time after everyone else had left, staring at the empty judge's bench, the vacant witness stand, the chairs where the jury had sat. Justice had been served. The man who murdered Sarah and Lily would pay the ultimate price. The valley was safe. The paintings would endure. Everything Elijah had fought for had been achieved. But he felt no joy, no satisfaction, only a quiet emptiness where his anger had been. Clara found him there an hour later. She sat beside him without speaking, her hand finding his, her presence a comfort that required no words. "I thought I would feel different," Elijah said finally. "I thought watching him be convicted would fill the hole inside me, would bring some kind of peace. And it did not? No. The hole is still there. Sarah and Lily are still gone. Nothing changes that." Clara nodded slowly. "My grandmother says that revenge is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. Even when justice is served, it does not undo the past. It does not bring back what was lost. Then what is the point? Why fight at all if winning does not fix anything, because fighting protects others from suffering the same loss?" Clara turned to face him. "Blackwood will never hurt anyone again. The families he would have destroyed are safe now. The history he would have erased will endure. That matters even if it does not heal your own wounds." She touched his face gently. "And sometimes, in fighting for something larger than yourself, you find reasons to keep living. You find people worth loving. You find a future worth building." She smiled. "I found you, Elijah. That matters too." Elijah looked at her. This woman who had changed everything, who had given him a reason to live again after 3 years of merely surviving. "Yes," he said quietly, "that matters most of all." They returned to Whitfield Valley in late autumn. The aspens had turned gold, and the air carried the crisp edge of approaching winter. The valley looked different than it had during the battle. Peaceful, serene. The scars of violence faded by time and weather. Elijah had sold his cabin in the high country, sold his trap lines, sold everything that had tied him to his old life of solitude. He was not that man anymore, not the hermit who had hidden from the world, not the ghost who had walked through life without really living it. He was something new now, something better. They built a small house at the edge of the valley, close enough to protect the cave and its precious paintings, far enough to provide privacy. Samuel's warriors helped with the construction, showing techniques that had been used for generations. The house was simple, sturdy, built to last. A home. On the day they moved in, Clara gave Elijah a gift. It was a small painting on deerskin, an image of 2 figures standing side by side, looking out over a valley that stretched green and beautiful beneath a rising sun. "I made it myself," she said shyly, "using the old techniques. It is not as good as the paintings in the cave, but I wanted you to have something that shows what we have become." Elijah studied the image, the care that had gone into every stroke, the love that was visible in every line. "It is perfect," he said. And it was. 1 year later they stood together on the ridge above the valley. Clara's hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly, evidence of the child they would welcome in spring. Their child, born of 2 worlds, heir to 2 histories. The sun was setting behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of fire. The valley below glowed with golden light. "What should we name the baby?" Clara asked. "If it is a boy, we could call him Daniel." "After your brother?" Clara smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I would like that. And if it is a girl, Sarah?" Elijah touched the wedding ring that still hung around his neck, though now it shared the cord with a new ring, a simple band of silver that Clara had placed there on their wedding day. "After the woman who taught me that love does not end with death, that the heart is bigger than we think." "Sarah," Clara repeated. "I never met her, but I feel like I know her. Through you, through the man she helped create. She would have liked you." Elijah pulled Clara close, holding her as the sun continued its descent. "She would have been happy knowing that I found love again, that I kept my promise. Tell him never to let anyone die alone." He had kept that promise, through violence and loss, through grief and healing, through battles fought and won. He had kept the promise Sarah made him swear. And in keeping it, he had found something he thought was lost forever: a reason to live, a person to love, a home to protect, a future to build. Below them, the valley stretched peaceful and eternal. The cave with its ancient paintings stood sentinel against the darkening sky. 500 years of history, 500 years of memory, and now new stories being added to the walls, new chapters being written in the ongoing saga of human experience. Elijah Stone had come to this place as a stranger, a broken man carrying the ashes of his past. He had found healing, purpose, love. He had found home. And somewhere in the gathering dusk Sarah smiled. Her husband had kept his promise. He had not let anyone die alone. He had saved lives. He had protected the innocent. He had chosen justice over revenge and love over bitterness. He had become the man she always knew he could be. And that was enough. That was everything. The stars emerged one by one as night fell over Whitfield Valley. The same stars that had watched over this place for 500 years. The same stars that would watch over it for 500 more. And beneath those ancient lights, two people stood together, looking toward a future they would build with their own hands. A future born of sacrifice and courage and hope. A future worth fighting for. A future worth living. The end of one story, the beginning of another, and the promise that had started it all echoing through the years like a prayer answered at last. Never let anyone die alone. He never did. He never would. And that made all the difference.